Hello everyone, welcome back. Talking Sense, I'm Ben. Today we're going to be having a look at a fragrance that is from a house that I really like. Everything I've smelt of theirs, I really enjoy. And I don't think they get like a super great deal of talk. So yeah, we're going to be having a look at Tokyo by Gallivant. So Gallivant, they're again like I did a review on London, and I sort of mentioned that they don't get a lot of hype. They're a great little house. They've got 8 fragrances now, and they're all based on cities. They've got London, which I've reviewed, Amsterdam, which I will be reviewing. They got Tokyo, which I am reviewing, and then they've got Berlin, Tel Aviv, Istanbul, Los Angeles, and one more, Brooklyn. And it's like I say that like everyone I've smelt London, Tokyo, Amsterdam, and I really enjoyed them all. So yeah, I think they're a really great house. I think they're a little bit underrepresented. So I thought, why not review this one? I was wearing it today, and I just was enjoying it. And I thought, you know what? Let's go talk about it. So Tokyo by Gallivant. It's a tiny little bottle, 30 ml, and it's pretty interesting scent. It's got some pretty weird notes in it. Well, it's got one pretty weird note in it, but it's still a pretty interesting scent. They come, all Gallivants come in these little boxes, which are quite nice. If you can see that, they have like a little map on the front, and then they just, it's just quite nice packaging. Really, they're nothing too fancy, but I quite like them. For the price, I think like they are really good. Anyway, the actual scent, what's it all about? It's a bizarre little eccentric number that I think is a theme for Gallivant. The notes are yuzu, bergamot, black pepper, cardamom, and wasabi in the top, which is, you know, pretty weird. Wasabi. In the middle, hinoki, cedar. Hinoki is like a Japanese cedar, and cedar separately, apparently, as a note. Incense, iris, rose, don't think so, and cardamom. And in the base notes, amber, sandalwood, patchouli, and vetiver. Hinoki and wasabi are probably the 2 notes that are kind of most interesting out of all of those, or most unusual, I suppose. Actually, you've probably smelt hinoki. If you're not sure what that is, you probably smelt it if you're into Comme des Garçons scents. They do a lot with hinoki. But essentially, it's like a lemony, quite clean lemony cedar scent. And wasabi is, explain that one. Quite an interesting scent. So when you first spray it, the very first interesting note is going to jump out, and that's going to be the wasabi. It's not immediate for me. Like when I first spray it, like right now, I get big blast of citrus. There's that yuzu, although I think yuzu is fairly indistinguishable unless you're like really kind of pinning it down as like, hey, that's a yuzu. I think it's more just like a kind of lemony citric vibe, and that's kind of mixed with pepper, and that's the initial 2 blasts for me, is this kind of quite lemony bergamot pepper blast with a very designer kind of blur feel, like, you know, sort of Bleu de Chanel, blue, a lot of blue designers. It definitely has a bit of a blue, and then you get this kind of incense note that starts creeping out as well into that opening. Straight away you get like a little touch of incense. What I think it really reminds me of from the opening is Nuit d'Issy by Issey Miyake, and that again, it's like Bleu de Chanel, that kind of typical blue fragrance, but with added incense. So it makes a lot of sense, but it really reminds me of that. But it also has this wasabi note, which comes about now, roughly. It's coming in now. The wasabi in this is pretty weird, because you got this like quite aquatic opening, really. This kind of like citric aquatic opening, sort of bit blur. And wasabi feeds into that a little bit, because legit actual wasabi, you know, it has this kind of green, slightly aquatic feel, but also slightly spicy, warm feel. And you've got like yuzu, citrus, pepper. So it's kind of just amping up both of those, and sort of feeding in just this touch of like greenery into it. It feels quite strange. It's quite a peculiar opening. After about a minute, you get this quite peculiar opening, because also a lot of the wood come in as well. So you get the hinoki and the cedar come in, and at that point, you've got this like quite fresh, aquatic sort of feel, like almost like a kind of blue designery feel, but with these kind of like slight incense and woods, and it elevates it from being that kind of typical blue designer fragrance, right? It moves it up a step from that, and it really starts to sort of pull into its own space and remove it from that kind of, oh yeah, it's just a generic blue designer fragrance. It doesn't at all smell like that. After about 5 minutes, that incense creeps up much more, and the cedar creeps up much more, and the that kind of initial aquatic vibe starts kind of sitting down. The vetiver kind of blooms a little bit and helps push that incense as well, and it really at that point moves quite away from where you think it's gonna go. When you first spray it, you feel like it's got this quite like fresh, aquatic-y kind of blue designer fragrance vibe to it, but when this like the vetiver and the cedar and the incense come in, I'd say after about 5 to 10 minutes, it clearly shows it's walking down like a path, like an incense path, and this fragrance is going to be all incense, and it sort of is after this. And the incense is very, very subtle and slightly sweet, and it smells very much like a high class. If you're into incense at all, a Japanese incense particularly, they don't have that bamboo middle like core or anything, so they're not overly smoky, and you can get quite close to them. And if you can smell them up close, you can almost smell the ember, and you get that in this a little bit, because that pepper and that wasabi kind of emulate the kind of heat from the incense, and that's quite interesting. And it does smell very much like, at this point, like a slight sweet spiced incense, and it's really nice that you get this wood, you get this incense, really, really nice. The iris comes out a little bit in the middle, and that's really the next step, because this is not such a linear fragrance. It once it settles down, I don't think it moves too far, but sort of all round about now, it's doing these subtle shifts, and the iris is starting to come up, and you get this iris and cardamom that kind of slip into the middle there, and they sort of warm up that incense, and the other notes to me feel quite cold, and again the iris is quite cold, so you've got this like quite cold cedar and quite cold iris, but mixed with these quite warm incense and spices. So it starts sort of finding an equilibrium, like rather than sort of being one way or the other, like super cold aquatic fresh or spicy dense incense. It starts kind of finding a nice middle ground between the two, and the iris just sort of helps to kind of smooth things out and make things get a little bit velvety, almost sort of powdery, but not overly so. You get a little bit of that patchouli at the start, and it adds a bit of sweetness, a bit of depth, a bit of darkness, but it really about here starts kicking in, and it really drags it down and starts making it feel quite earthy and damp, and at this point I think it's really, really good. This is kind of where it starts sort of leveling out, and it becomes a little more linear, but it makes this weird juxtaposition between a really quite smooth iris and a quite sharp industrial cedar, and a damp earthy patchouli, which, you know, is weird because you've got these quite contradictory notes there in terms of like feeling and evocative vibes, right? Because you've got these quite industrial hard sharpness and then a kind of soft powdery floral sweetness and an earthy damp darkness, and they all kind of mishing together and making Tokyo Gallivant, I guess. It swamps out that blue vibe, that generic blue vibe gets utterly swamped out by all this, but it's still there in the background. And then that, I think, is the heart of what this fragrance is trying to get at, and I really think it's what this fragrance is trying to do, and that's make those kind of contradictory sort of juxtapositions between like old and new. So you've got the blue vibe that is the kind of new, but it sort of sits alongside this kind of old incense, very spiritual incense kind of vibe, and it's quite a clever pairing, I think, actually. And I think that's essentially what it's trying to do. If you've ever been to Tokyo, like, you know, it's a higgledy-piggledy city in a lot of ways. Like, you have these kind of industrial units all along the rivers, and you've got these glass buildings that are like ultra modern with like neon lights, and then you've got like this like ancient temple that's just sitting next to them. Yeah, everything in Japan is kind of like in different stages of being. There's no kind of uniformity to the place. You know, everything is whatever it's next to is doesn't really seem to make any sense, and that is, in my eyes, what this fragrance is trying to get at, is that kind of mishmash of different places and feels and vibes, and putting them all together and somehow making that work. Because obviously Tokyo does work, you know, and it has its own character precisely for that. And I think that's what this fragrance is trying to do. And I don't want to go too much down this road because, you know, concepts in fragrances are great and I love them, but sometimes I feel like I don't really get them. But just like with Tokyo London, and I did kind of understand that vibe. I do very much understand the vibe in Tokyo Gallivant. It is very much this kind of like old and new, this awkward eccentric juxtaposition, and again, just like Gallivant London, I said that it could make a really good signature scent for someone who was a little bit eccentric, and I think you could say the same for this, you know, because it's creative and it's absolutely eccentric, but it's safe and wearable. Like, you could totally wear it because it's got those blue aquatic vibes. It makes it safe and wearable. Absolutely, you could wear this in the office, no problem. Like, you know, you could wear it anywhere you wanted, no problem. And people, if they didn't pay too much attention to it, would just think you're wearing like a kind of aftershavey smell. They wouldn't really focus too much. But if they did focus on it, they realise that actually there's a lot of character and intricacy going on there. And that is, I think, what Gallivant does really well. And they do it really well in London. They do it really well in this one. They do it really well in Amsterdam. And I'm guessing the entire rest of the line. I haven't smelt them, would love to. But that's what I'm guessing, is that they do this thing where they're completely safe and wearable on the surface, but you scratch a little bit and they're completely eccentric, actually. Like, they're very creative, completely eccentric, but on, you know, you do have to scratch a little bit, because if you just smell it in the air, smell this fragrance in the air, you think, oh yeah, it's incense blue. Okay, yeah, sure. Nui Dirsi, do you know what I mean? It's very close to Nui Dirsi in those respects. Even, you could even say it has at 1 foot or maybe like 1 toe in like Bleu de Chanel and things like that. But you give it a sniff and you start scratching away a little bit, and it has all these bizarre nuances. I mean, Wasabi, for fuck's sake. How many times have you smelt that in a fragrance? And you do get it here, and it does do great things to the fragrance. You know, it warms it up, it keeps it spicy, it gives it that green aquatic edge. it's not just chucked in because it's Japanese. You know what I mean? It's been thought about what it's actually going to achieve for the fragrance, and I really like Gallivant for that. I think they're really creative, and I think they work really hard to make fragrances which are safe and wearable, but utterly creative and somewhat eccentric. They all have this kind of eccentric traits, and I really like them for that. Say this fragrance, Tokyo. I don't like it as much as London. I really like London though, but I do like this. So who do I think it's for? I do think it's masculine a little bit. I would say if you wanted to wear it as a female, you totally could. You wouldn't be like out of place. But I do feel like it's got that masculine vibe. If you don't mind wearing like blue fragrances like Bleu de Chanel, Nuit d'Issy, things like that, you'll be fine with this, because this is more interesting than those, and that in turn makes it more feminine, I guess, because or at least it makes it more gender neutral. But it does have those like kind of blur facets, you know, and so that is going to sort of swing it a little bit masculine to me. But like I say, I personally think anyone could wear it, and I wouldn't smell this on a woman. I think they smell wrong or anything. Like, it smells great, and it would smell great on anyone. But I do think it does swing masculine. When you want to wear it, interestingly, I think this fragrance occupies a really nice space in that, again, it's pretty, you could wear it 4 seasons, I think. But for me, this is like a fresh scent for the winter. It's cold and fresh and slightly aquatic, but it's got those warm kind of cardamom, incense, and vetiver, wasabi to kind of heat it up and keep it warm. And that I really like. I'm not sure if that's like a personal preference. I actually quite like sometimes those like quite industrial cold fragrances in the winter. On those kind of clear, fresh days, I think they work really magically, and I think this is the same. But I do think this is where it shines. But otherwise, I think it's pretty much any season. Dress it up or down, I think it's dressed down slightly. I do think it's quite casual. But yeah, you totally could dress it up if you wanted. But I do feel like it's more of a casual scent. I like it for its kind of playfulness with those kind of contradictions. I think that's really nice. But I think it's perhaps a little bit arty or eccentric to wear in a really dressy place. But yeah, otherwise, I think it's a really nice fragrance. I think if you really like Comme des Garçons and you feel like maybe their scents are getting a little bit boring these days, because they are, you know, like where Comme des Garçons used to be quite edgy, I feel like they've kind of lost a lot of that these days. This is something that you might interest you. I think other fragrances that I think would interest you if you like this, or if you want to know what I think, you know, it smells like. Comme des Garçons by Monocle Scent 3, Sugi is very much along these sorts of lines. They are different, but they have similar facets in the cedar and the incense and that kind of calm, quiet Japanese sort of feel that they're going for. But yeah, a lot of Comme des Garçons scents, things like that. If you're into Comme des Garçons, I think you'd be right at home here. Yeah, otherwise, I think it's an excellent scent. I think it's really good. I say I have tried. Well, I own 3 from Gallivant, and they're the only 3 I've tried. I blind bought all of them because I'm a moron. And I would very much like to try the rest, and will, because I think they're a house that they don't get a lot of hype. They're a really good house, and I really enjoy everything that I've smelled from them. I think Tokyo is a notch down from London for me, but London is up there. So I think they're really both really great scents. I will be doing a review for Amsterdam shortly. Once again, actually, interestingly, Amsterdam is not my thing, but I like it. So I will be doing a kind of interesting review on that one coming up quite soon. But yeah, thanks very much for watching. That's Tokyo Gallivant. Really nice fragrance. Great one for winter. Great if you're looking for like a fresh scent in the winter. It's worth checking out because it's not. That's a genre that's not, you know, that well represented, and neither is the kind of spicy, fresh, woody scents. So, you know, if that's what you're looking for, I think it's worth checking out. Definitely, it's really interesting. It has a really nice wearability, but it doesn't sacrifice creativity for that at all. So yeah, thanks very much for watching. Cheers. Nice one.